Hey, welcome back. This time I'm going to show you guys about component editing modes. These are the bits that make up 3D elements within Maya. So to start off with, I'm just going to go ahead and create a polygon primitive cube just as a demonstration object. If you'll remember your controls, we can move around our camera, pan our camera, zoom our camera by holding Alt, left mouse, middle mouse, and right mouse. If I want to focus on this image, I can just go ahead and hit F. F for focus, and we zoom right into it. This is in wireframe view mode right now, which is the letter 4 on the keyboard. I can hit the number 5 to turn it into smooth shade mode, but I'm going to leave it on wireframe for just a moment to show you some of the initial component modes. When you hover over an object with your selection tool and hold down the right mouse button, you're going to get this radial menu right here, and I'm still holding the button right now. You don't want to release it because releasing it will select whichever one of these menu items that you're currently aimed at. And if you don't want to select any of them, of course, move your mouse to the center before you release the mouse button. Okay? So holding down the right mouse button, you can see I've got a number of different items here. Object mode is the mode that we've currently been working in, moving the entire polygon object around as a whole. We've got UV mode, which is relevant to texturing, so we're not going to use that for now. Multi, which frankly I find a little bit confusing. It encompasses several different types of components, so I don't use it very much. Face, which are the enclosed areas on the sides which appear solid when we use smooth shading. Vertex face, which I'm a little bit shaky on what the difference is between vertex and vertex face. Vertex, which is a individual corner on the object, and I'll show all of these in greater detail, of course. And then edges, which are exactly as they describe the edges of the object. Okay, so I'm going to start out with vertex mode. Okay, I select vertex mode. You can see that the object changes color, and now we've got these tiny little purple dots, which I can highlight by rolling over on each one of the corners. And these are the vertices. Every object in 3D is made up of vertices connected together with edges, and then the edges connect together to make an entire face. Okay, so this cube has 6 faces, 6 polygon faces, okay, which are joined together to create the solid appearance of the object. Right? We can move these vertices around just like as if they were objects of their own. The one thing that you cannot do, though, is, two things. You can't rotate or scale them by themselves, but if you have multiple vertices selected, then you can do that. So here I've just hit W, and I'm moving this vertice around, and as you can see, it's distorting the shape of the cube and making it take on different shapes. Okay? As you can see with this individual vertice, if I try to rotate, nothing happens, and if I try to scale, nothing happens. Okay, I'm just undoing to put that back where it started. If I grab more than one vertice, so I can select this one up here, and then just hold down Shift to select a second one, or I can drag around them both to select them both. Now I can scale and move them relative to each other. Now it's worth noting that if I scale down, all the way down to where they touch, see how they eventually pass through the center, but I can try to get it all the way down to nothing, if I can try that. They never actually combine. You can see if I zoom in there very, very closely, they are sitting right next to each other. They may appear to be one vertice if I zoom out, but they're not combined. They still exist as 2 separate vertices. So I'm going to undo and push them back out to where they started. And of course, you can rotate them. Like I'll grab all 4 of these, effectively half of the cube, and I can rotate them and create a skewed shape that way. Okay, so those are vertices. The vertices are the smallest bit that you can interface with a polygonal object, and so they're very good for minute, detailed adjustments. They tend to be a little less useful for larger scale adjustments because you might accidentally miss a vertice, or you might grab too many. Also, with regards to selection process, even though this looks like a solid object, if I click and drag here over these 2 front vertices, it's worth noting that the selection goes all the way through the object, and I've actually selected this rear facing vertice as well. That happens all the time when you're making vertex or edge or even face selections. So knowing how to deselect this is helpful. Just hold down Control and left click and drag around what you want to remove from your selection, and now that's gone, and I've got these two remaining. Okay, so those are vertices. I'm going to hold down right click again. So it won't let me do that sometimes if I'm not hovering right over the object, which in wireframe mode means the edge of the object rather than the face, because we can't see the face. But if I were in smooth shade, it would allow me to access that menu from the face. Okay, so just be aware of where you need to click, especially if you click out here, you're not going to get that same menu. Okay, holding down while hovering over the edge, holding down right click, I'm going to go up to edge mode, and edge mode allows me to select the edges. Okay, so here's an edge, there's an edge, here are 3 edges. Okay, the edge comprises at least 2 vertices. Okay, 1, 2, and it can comprise more if you grab continuous edges. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 edges for the top, which allow me to move the top of the cube around, and I can scale the top of the cube. These tend to be useful for slightly larger scale deformations. For instance, if I wanted to make this cube into like a trapezoid, then I could grab both of these 2 edges and then scale them outward away from each other to create kind of a trapezoidal prism type of shape, or maybe even a pyramid type shape if I grabbed all 4, scale them all together. So we've got like a pyramid platform there. Okay. Oftentimes I don't use edges unless I need to just kind of adjust something into the proper shape. Oftentimes I'll opt to use vertices just because you can do everything with vertices if you really want to. You just have to be very careful about the vertices that you select. But edges are very useful for certain things, and of course we need to select edges for a lot of more advanced modeling commands that we will be learning later on. I just don't like using them for adjustments per se. Okay. The third type of component mode, I'm going to switch to smooth shade for this one. Hold down right click and choose face, and face is the enclosed areas created by the edges, which create the actual renderable surface. So each one of these faces on the cube. And you can move faces, you can rotate faces, you can scale faces, just like any of the other component modes. Okay? And that's about it for the component modes. Those 3 get you through most types of adjustments that you could want to do, any sort of shape that you need to form. The only extra bit of information that I'm leaving out for now is how to create new detail within face, edge, and vertice. But we're going to leave that for another time, and instead I'm going to show you how to create additional detail on a polygonal model using its inputs. Okay? The inputs are found when you select an object in object mode. So I switch back to object mode by holding down right click, going over to object mode, and then selecting the object. You can see it turns green. We can no longer see vertices. We can no longer select or highlight faces or edges. And the inputs are located right down here in Polycube 1 in the channel box, which you'll remember is this button right here. Okay? Now, there's a warning about using these inputs on polygonal objects if you have distorted your object. So I'll go ahead and lower this down, move a vertice out over here, grab a face somewhere, how about that one, and rotate it. If you have distorted your object already into a strange shape, and I switch back to object mode, then these inputs may not work the way that you expect them to. These inputs are intended to be used immediately following the creation of the polygon object, or if upon creation you want to use them, each one of these default polygon primitives has an option box next to it. You can click the option box and get many of those same inputs right here in the creation dialog box. And then you can hit create, and it will apply all of those changes that you make. I prefer to do it after the fact though, because it's interactive and you can see the results immediately. which requires less guesswork on my part. But let me just show you what will happen. This will possibly work, possibly not, but I'm going to try to change some of these numbers here. Let's go ahead and just say 2 for the width. That seems fairly normal, seems all right. How about for the subdivisions? Oh dear. Yes. Some very strange things happened there. It was contorting into lots of different shapes, trying to take on the appearance of a default cube, but its bits are out of sort, so it's not quite working as intended. Okay, so that's your warning. Use the inputs only at the point of creation, and then use the extra information that's created on the polygon object going forward from there. But don't go back in here and mess with these over and over and over again. Let's go ahead and just start out then again fresh with a new polygon cube, and I'll show you what some of those settings do. So these three, width, height, and depth, are the default size of the cube's dimensions. This is independent from scale, so if I turn width to 2, its default width is 2, which is in the x direction, and a scale of 1, or 100%, equals 2 units now. Okay? That's not particularly exciting for a cube, but what is interesting is the subdivisions section down here. By the way I'm interactively moving these numbers, instead of selecting the number, go ahead and select the word of the channel that you want to affect, and then hold down middle mouse and drag left and right, and you can see it increments the number, and we can see the result in the viewport there. So what I'm doing is increasing the subdivisions in the x direction, which gives me extra edges, which I can then select their vertices, select their edges, and select the now bisected faces. Okay? If you know what you're going to build in advance, you can use this to give yourself as much detail as you would want in whichever direction you would want, and then start pushing and pulling around the edges and the vertices to get the shape that you desire. Okay? It can be a little bit tough to plan for stuff like that sometimes, but this is the way to start out an object if you know that basically you're going to need a couple more sections of detail, and just put that detail on immediately. So I have an example prepared for the type of thing that you might want to plan for this way. I have some pictures over here for it. Let's see. There we go. So this is the type of symmetric shape that we can plan for rather easily with regards to modeling it just from the inputs alone. Okay? So each one of these two bottles is basically a cylinder. Okay? It's round going all the way up, and it has a flat top and it has a flat bottom. All we would need to know to add detail to our cylinder, our default cylinder, is how many subdivisions going upward would we need to approximate these shapes. Okay? So I like to try to think about it like, how many turns are there? Oops, that's going, oh no, that's a little bit, there we go. How many turns are there in this sweeping shape that goes up to the top of the bottle? Because that's how many vertices I'm going to need, or how many edges that I'm going to need. So we start with 1 at the bottom because that's a given. The cylinder has to have a base. Then the bottle moves outward and becomes flat at this point. So I'm going to say that's going to be 1, 2, 3. Then it sweeps in and sort of flattens out. So I'm going to say that's 4, 5. Then it moves out again, 6, and becomes sort of round. So I'll just go ahead and say 7, 8, comes back in, 9, becomes a little bit flattened, tapered, 10, steps out, 11, steps in, 12, steps out again, 13, and the remaining one should be 14, which we don't have a control over because the cylinder needs to have a top to it. So it should be 14 divisions going up to approximate this Coke bottle shape. Okay, so I'm going to see if that works out when I create a cylinder. Okay, so I'm going to create a cylinder, create polygon cylinder, open up its inputs, and you can see we've got a radius and height, subdivisions around it, which are just how round they are. That can be important too, but for now we'll just leave it at the default, and then subdivisions in height. And so 14 is what we decided on, but I noticed something when we created it. Let me turn it back down. It started at 1, but if we count, we've got 1, 2 subdivisions already. So they start at 1, but we've actually got 2. So instead of 14, I'm going to enter in 13. Okay, so now if I count from starting at the bottom, I'll go to Edge Mode. 1. Let me turn on just my selection tool with Q so that my manipulator is in the way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So that should be just about right for our Coke bottle. Okay, now I've got this picture of a Coke bottle, right? And what would be really useful is if I could get this into Maya to just sort of use as a template, to sort of trace over. Okay, and I'm going to do exactly that, but before I do, let me just make a note on the type of reference that you might want to use when you're creating something realistic. Now, first of all, do use reference when you're trying to create realistic things. Okay, it's one of the ways that you can be rigorous. One of the ways that you can be accurate is to find photographs of the things that you want to create and try to reproduce their proportions, their shape, their contours as closely as possible. But there are some pictures which are better, some pictures which are worse for that end. This picture that I've chosen because we are looking at these bottles in a very flat perspective. If you look at the base of the bottles, it's relatively flat. The top of the bottles is relatively flat. They look like they're from two different pictures, but they were both taken with a relatively wide angle lens or narrow angle lens. I'm not sure which way it is, but one of them cancels perspective information. And as you can see, the lines are relatively flat going across this, so this is going to be good to trace from. I have another picture which is less ideal. Here you can see the photographer is fairly close to these bottles. The bottoms curve a lot, and the tops curve, and our eye line is somewhere around this region, maybe where the drink starts, right here. That's going to be less ideal because the perspective is going to sort of fool your eye into thinking that things are happening that they're not. You can still use an image like this, but you just have to be cautious not to kind of slavishly copy from it and to just use it as a basic proportion reference. Let me also caution you, if you're going to make this bottle and choose your own, not to choose one like this. Even though this picture is really good, the problem is that this shape is great, very, very easy to reproduce, but these bits on the bottom of these modern plastic bottles are a little bit beyond you at this point. You might be able to figure out how to do it if you really, really thought hard about it, but once we get through to actually making and deleting our own component mode information, that sort of puzzle is going to get a lot easier. So for right now, since we're just using defaults primitives with default proportions, I wouldn't recommend using something like that plastic bottle. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to get this image into Maya, okay, so that we can use it. There's something called an image plane that we can put images directly on, but you're going to have to go into one of your orthographic views to use it. So you can either click this button here, or you can tap the spacebar with your mouse hovering in the screen to bring up our view. And I'm just going to choose the front viewport as my viewport that I'm going to use. Okay? At the top of the viewport window, go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. And you're going to have your image saved somewhere that you can access it. So you have to download it from the internet, have it saved on your desktop, or have it saved in your project folder, whichever. Okay? So View, View Image Plane, Import Image. And I've already gone ahead and placed it into my project folder, and it's this one right here. So Bottle Battle, I guess they were comparing the two brands of bottles or something. I'll go ahead and hit Open, and there it is in my viewport. And you're going to see that it's not actually locked to my camera in this instance because I'm in an orthographic view. The problem is if you were in your perspective view, this image would lock itself to the perspective camera, which is not ideal. But here it is in the perspective view, and you can select it by dragging right along the edge of the image plane. So not here, but right along the edge of the image plane it can be selected. And we can see in the channel box that it's got some settings. We've got an offset X and Y, which appears to not do anything. Width and height will do something, but not quite what you expect sometimes. When I go larger than the default height width, it does not scale up, and when I go below it, it just uniformly scales the image. So this can be a little bit confusing, but we can use this to sort of size and position our bottle near our polygon object so that we can start off and start making this work properly. In order to move the image, we're going to have to use these image center coordinate channels. I can see that side to side is X for me, so I'm going to go ahead and select image center X and move this to where it sort of bisects right along the origin plane here. Okay, so hopefully a little bit difficult to tell. We can turn the alpha gain down. I think it's the alpha gain. Let's go ahead and try that. There we go. So I turned that to 0.5, so this is like half opacity. And that's going to make it a little bit easier to see right where the bottle is located. And what you're going to find probably is that unless you found a illustrated image, the bottle is not always going to be perfectly symmetrical. I would just say don't worry too much about that. We're using this as reference, as an approximation. It does not have to be absolutely perfect. But I'm going to just place it right there. That looks pretty good to me. And I'll go ahead and reselect my polygon object so that I can scale it. Since I haven't done any component mode editing yet, I can still use the radius and height. So I'll go ahead and change the radius to where it says wide as the widest part of the bottle, right about there. And I'll increase the height to where it just about matches the bottle. Wow, that was convenient. It just about hit both sides. Cool. That was not planned for, but that's fantastic. Okay, I'm going to hop out of my orthographic view just briefly to show you what's going on in perspective view. We've got this image plane, and our object is currently residing right inside it. Okay, that's not really going to be a problem, but I do find it somewhat annoying if I'm working on something a little bit more complicated, going back and forth between these views. Having this sitting right here in the middle of my object is obnoxious. So what we can do is we can move image center Z either to a negative value or to a positive value. I like to go with a value that moves it back away from camera. And you can see here in the front view, the Z axis is that one right there that is facing us, or facing directly away from us as it might be. So we're not going to see any change in that viewport except the visibility of the polygons. Okay? So it looks like my camera is facing this way. So a negative value in Z moves this away from my bottle. And I'll just place it back there somewhere. You can see that nothing has changed here with regards to a reference, but now my object is free and I can easily see what's going on with it. Okay? So I'm going to use the existing detail on my object to try to shape this bottle symmetrically. And this is going to be a little bit of a trick. Okay? What I can do is go to one of my component modes. Let's just choose Vertex. Okay? And if I'm making my selection in this perspective view, and I want to grab one cross section of this bottle, well, I got lucky and got a really nice clean cross section, but let me try again and make it a little bit more sloppy. You can see that because I'm looking at this in perspective diagonally, I can easily get more than one row of information going down this bottle. But if I'm making my selection here in this orthographic view, I can make a nice clean selection that goes straight around the bottle. And that's what I'm going to want to do. Each ring of detail going around this bottle, I'm going to want to scale symmetrically so that the bottle retains its round shape. Now, something I've seen students do a lot is to work exclusively in this view, select a ring, and then scale it using this component editor on the side rather than the center one. Okay? You might not know what this is doing right away, but it will become evident as soon as I jump back into my perspective view. Uh-oh, right? What I was doing is squeezing the bottle down side to side, but I was not reducing its width in depth. So I get this pinched off shape as opposed to a nice round fluted shape. So I'm going to undo those selections. To avoid that problem, first of all, what you can do is leave this visible and frequently refer back to it. That's very, very helpful. But also, go ahead and select the ring and then use the center cube, not the side cube here. When you do that, it's going to scale uniformly, meaning all directions are scaling at once. So although it will become thinner side to side, it will also become thinner in depth. And if I do just a couple of these, you can see that now it's working out properly. Okay, so that's just a note. I'm going to go ahead and jump into this view and see if I can't line up these edge rings right where I want them to first. Okay. Also another note, if you do use edge mode and try to drag around one of these sections, you're going to end up getting this information up here and this information down here in addition to the ring. So be cautious about that. You may need to deselect those parts. Let's get that back. Edge. Deselect those parts before you move it to get the desired effect. Unless it is this that you want. In that case, you're going to get two edge rings at once, which is kind of convenient. All right, so I'm going to use vertexes, grab a ring, and I'm going to move this just vertically, okay, to the position that I think it needs to be. So I'm going to move this down to right about there. That's where I saw the flat bit on the bottom. I'm going to move this one down to the end of the flat bit on the bottom. I'm going to move this one down to the beginning of the flat space of this pinch, and this one to the top because that's where I planned for. Then I had these three for the round bit of this turning central part. So I'll put this right where the glass detail ends, right in the middle, and at the top. Now here's a tricky thing. I want to put it right there, but there's already an edge there. Don't drag past detail which is already existent there. Instead, grab them both and move them both together so that they don't collide with each other. And there's no real reason to do that except that it can get confusing to keep track of which edge came before which other edge. And if you do it wrong, you're going to get some artifacting details in your model, and the edge flow won't work properly across the surface. So just for an example, I'm going to take this edge, which is supposed to occur above this other one here, and then drag it below. Okay, you see that rapid flashing sort of, striated lines thing going on there? That's called z-fighting. Okay, what it means is that there are two faces occupying the same space in 3D, and the program doesn't know which one to render. Okay, and so it's confused, and as I rotate my camera around, you can see that's quite a problem. Okay, so whenever you see a problem like that, stop, maybe undo a few times. Something has gone wrong. Some sort of detail is inside some other detail. Okay, let's pop back into our perspective view, or our side view here, so that I can see what, oh, you know what, I didn't quite put that in the middle. I'm going to drag this right about there. Okay, so I can see where I'm lining everything up before I scale it. Let's see, what did I have now? Well, let's start at the top now. I'll just leave that be for now because I've got some more detail up here. This one is going to be the outward step of the cap. This one's going to be the inward step of the cap. Now technically they should lie right on top of each other, but I'm going to leave this one slightly below for now just as an indication of which is which. Then I've got this one, which is the outward lip of the glass, and this one, which is the lower lip of the glass, right there. I'll line that one up properly, and this one will have to almost lie right on top of it. And then finally, we've got this bit, which I believe I had positioned somewhere around here. And that should do it. Okay, it's going to be a fairly simple looking bottle, but it'll serve as an example. Okay, now I'm going to pop back to my perspective view, and just make sure that I didn't distort anything, that it's still a perfect cylinder. The only difference now is that these edges are lined up vertically in their proper location. The reason that that is because when I was moving things, I was using the green arrow right there, and I was not dragging from the center like this. So everything is lined up, and if I look at my top view at this point, you can see that it's still a perfect circle from the top. None of these is shifted off to the side like that. There's no apparent perspective. If yours does not look like that, go back and do it again, because something has already gone wrong. Undo the steps or create a new cylinder and try one more time to line it up. We got to make sure that we get each one of these steps one at a time, otherwise the whole thing's going to be crooked and very messy. Okay? One more important note before I go on. I haven't really been saving in these videos yet, but it is important for you to save frequently because things can go wrong. And not only do you want to save often, but you want to save in iterations depending on how complex your project is. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'll go File, Save, Scene As. Okay. You've got the choice of Maya ASCII or binary. I recommend ASCII typically because it's a little bit more forgiving for importing to different versions of Maya. And I'll just name this Bottle 01. And if I was going to work on this for a sufficient amount of time, my next save would be Bottle 02, Bottle 03, Bottle 04, and it's typical to get up into, you know, the 30s, 40s, maybe even the hundreds, depending on how complex your scene is. That way you have little milestones going back along your project to revert to, which you've saved yourself. And if something is terribly wrong that you discover down the line, you can go back versions and repair it somewhere. Okay? All right. So our last little step here is going to be to scale these vertex rings or these edge rings into the proper width to represent this bottle. Okay? And this is convenient because I've lined it up right down the center of this cylinder. So all I'm going to have to do is select an edge ring by holding down right click, vertex, dragging around the edge or the vertex line, then hitting R to get my scale tool and scaling from the center. Okay, the center box. So there we go. These two, yeah, they're about where they should be. Scale these down just to where they kind of touch the sides of the bottle. And that one, this one is just about where it should be. Okay. Scale this one down. Right down there. And now we get to the top detail. This bottom ring needs to be in the thinnest bit of the glass. This upper ring is the place where the glass extends outward. Now that I've got them at different sizes, I can move them to where they almost overlap. Now these look very, very close together here, but when we look in 3D, you can see that this is going to create a little shelf here. Okay, so it will still be visible. In fact, even if I overlap them from the perspective of this front view, they are not in fact overlapping, they are creating depth. Okay, but we won't do that for this one. I'll just leave it there. All right, now these last ones that create the cap, I'll take this one and scale it down just about like that. Okay, and then this one, which is the actual bottle cap, will be a bit wider. And in this case, I'll go ahead and push it even down over that other one. So I'll create a little cavity underneath there where you might open the bottle cap from. And then this top one, scale it in just about like that. It's going to be a rather boxy bottle cap, but that's okay for our simple example. And we're all done. Okay, I'm going to come back out here, deselect my component mode, and as you can see, not too shabby, right? Now there's lots and lots of room for improvement, but remember, don't beat yourself up about the fact that it does not exactly resemble this bottle. This was made out of a primitive. Okay, we're not even creating detail and destroying detail on the fly yet. We're only using the generated information from the inputs. And so this is a very, very rough estimate of that bottle. In particular, you can see the bottom is completely flat. The top is completely flat right now. And if I wanted to plan for additional detail, whoops, here we go. I could have planned for additional edges to soften the appearance of the top of this rounded bottle cap, additional edge details to soften the curve of this glass bit, or additional edge rings to go down the side of the bottle, etc., etc. None of that's important right now. All we want is for you to be able to move components around, select them, and manipulate them into a recognizable shape such as this, and that's the next big step in your journey to becoming a 3D modeler. So try that out. Try it with maybe one of these types of bottles that you see here, but anything which is perfectly symmetrical going straight down the center is going to work just as well, such as maybe a baby bottle or a water bottle.